Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends nearly 30 years apart explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Greene. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like frontal lobes, flooring, and flogging.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're talking about fast fashion. You know, the on-trend, cheap, off-the-rack clothing marketing to pretty much every demographic. It is a monstrously lucrative industry.
Well, spoiler alert, the clothes may be cheap, but the impact of them on the environment, as well as the people who make them, is staggering. And today we're going to talk about why that is and what we can do.
Well, I'm guessing that the why that is because it makes a lot of money for somebody. Ding, 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 ding.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, this is in my relationship to consumerism, this is something that is such a bummer for me because I don't think of myself as particularly fashionable, but I do, I like shopping sometimes, and I don't especially like spending a lot of money on clothes. And I like, the feeling of having a brand new pair of $40 jeans or, something quick and off the rack that gives me a little boost. I love that. And it comes at a big cost, even if the initial cost to the consumer is not big, the financial cost is not big, it comes at a big cost. And it's such a bummer for me.
Why is it that to be good citizens, good global citizens these days, we have to feel guilty about everything that's delicious?
So guilty. It's true. It's true. And if you're somebody who, I think sometimes about how, not that I want to do this, but how nice it must be to be somebody who doesn't worry about that kind of stuff. Like imagine not worrying about global warming.
I believe the phrase is ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, it does sound blissful.
Let's talk about what fast fashion is. I wasn't familiar with the term, though I was all too familiar with the concept and I believe the ramifications, but I've never heard the term fast fashion.
All right, well, let me walk you through it. So fast fashion is defined as cheap, trendy clothing that samples ideas from the catwalk or celebrity culture and turns them into garments in high street stores, which is like a British phrase for, trendy, popular stores, really fast to meet consumer demand. Because what happens is, the fashion world, which I don't really pay attention to, but styles come out. Have you seen Devil Wears Prada?
I have. Do I remember it is a better question.
Well, there's a classic exchange that you probably will remember because it's brilliant, and Meryl Streep is so brilliant in it. There's a classic exchange when Andy, who's played by Anne Hathaway, kind of questions Meryl Streep in something, and Meryl Streep just absolutely tears her down and says, you're wearing that sweater, and I think it's called cerulean blue. And then she explains to her how the cheap, mass-produced sweater that Andy is wearing, she's wearing that because the maker of the cheap sweater was influenced by some actual high fashion brand that was popular a few years ago. And she talks about the trickle-down effect of high fashion to fast fashion. It's a pretty great explanation, and it's a pretty brilliant moment in that movie.
I might have to look for that clip.
It's great. We'll link it in our show notes. It's a really good moment. So that is what happens. High fashion stuff comes into focus, and a lot of what we see on the runway is not stuff that normal people are going to wear anyway. So companies like Zara, The Gap, Walmart, Target,
Forever 21.
I mean, so there are some brands that it's unclear whether they're fast fashion. Things like Banana Republic and J. Crew. I think a lot of them have changed in quality, but basically we're talking about mass-produced stuff where the styles are changing constantly and it's not particularly well made. So they take those styles from the runway and translate them into something much more wearable for the average modern consumer. And so, that idea makes sense. But the idea is to get the newest styles on the market as fast as possible so people can snap them up when they're at the height of their popularity. But what that means is they're probably going to be discarded soon thereafter because they're not going to be on trend anymore. And therefore, companies don't invest in making them expensively because making clothing well costs money. And because they don't deem it necessary anyway, because it's not going to be on trend for very long, there are a lot of cheaply made, briefly, temporarily fashionable clothes. So then the cycle continues and people continue buying. And there are a few key problems with this. One is that because the clothing is not well made and does not last, it often ends up as waste. So what do most of us do when we're done wearing something? Those of us who think of ourselves as good people, who don't want to be wasteful and want to help others, we donate, right? Everyone I know is driving around with a garbage bag full of clothes to donate.
It's really disgusting when you think about it, that we always have a bag in our closet to throw things into when, for instance, they're stained and the stain won't come out, or they don't quite fit as well as they did before, or we're just sick of it.
It's true. And I think we assuage some of that guilt by thinking, well, we're going to give these to somebody who needs them, without thinking about the fact that we're giving someone who's already, if someone's in a place where they're needing donated clothing, they're already in a place where they're not feeling great, and we're offering them something that isn't well taken care of. So that's its own thing. But here's the bigger problem. I wanted to cry when I read this. I did not know this until I started researching. Only 16% of donated clothing is actually used for what you think it's going to be used for. And 84% ends up in landfills and incinerators.
Absolutely did not have any idea. That is appalling.
Yeah, it's really, my jaw dropped to the floor. And so we feel like we're contributing and helping others, but often that is just not the case.
And yet, what is the alternative?
So we'll get to that in the end. When we talk a little bit at the end, I want to talk about ways we can combat this. The main thing that I seem to understand is you can only do what you can do with what you've already got. But when it comes to making choices moving forward, choosing carefully and taking care of your clothing so that it does last, those seem to be major players in preventing this kind of thing. So what do you think so far?
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. I mean, I also, when you talk about what's on trend, I don't really care that much.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I just want to say that I've been doing recently is going through my friends' bags of things that they're going to get rid of. I have 2 new pairs of jeans that
that's great.
are actually much better made than any jeans that I purchased, because I'm more in the $40 range rather than the $200 range. But today I am wearing used $200 jeans that my friend was giving away. And
oh my gosh.
So there you go. That's another option. Just wanted to throw that in there.
I mean, I love a clothing swap. That is always so much fun. And then, another, to sort of piggyback on that, another great alternative to that sort of, another way to sort of follow that line of thinking is Poshmark and eBay. So whenever I get, like last summer, I sort of got addicted to the idea of jumpsuits. There was a jumpsuit. I was totally influenced by an Instagram ad or something, an Everlane jumpsuit, and I loved it. I thought it was so great. And my husband loves to seek, he's much more fashion-y than I am. He's much more into fashion. And he loves to stock particular items on eBay and Poshmark. Have you used Poshmark before?
I have not.
Poshmark is like all the fashion stuff on eBay. So it's kind of it's reselling of clothing, often lightly used, but it has to pass certain standards. So it's a good way to look for discounted things. And I found last season's version of the jumpsuit that I was really into, and it was not only was it a lot cheaper, but I feel when it comes to fast or fast-ish fashion, if I find something that I think I'm going to keep wearing that seems timeless enough, I often feel better about buying it used because
that makes total sense.
Contributing to giving it a second life.
Yeah, what is it? Reuse, recycle, there's another re in there.
Reduce, reuse, recycle. Exactly.
That's the one. See, 2 out of 3 is not bad. Hey, can I just say for just 1 second, though, about jumpsuits, because I got one. I haven't worn it yet. It's really cute.
Yeah.
Bought it at Marshall's. So, yeah, I don't know why I feel the need to share. Or maybe it was TJ. Anyway, it's kind of cumbersome when you have to go to the bathroom.
Okay, Joanne, I wore the cutest, prettiest jumpsuit to Yom Kippur services, and I did not think about the fact that I was going to have to get completely naked at temple every time I had to go to the bathroom on the holiest day of the year.
I would not have thought of that either, but I would have also thought that when fasting, you probably pee less, no?
Well, you'd be surprised.
Okay. We're into the TMI zone here. Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. So I feel you. It is truly, it's so funny because you put on a jumpsuit and you feel I personally always feel cuter than usual because they are so cute. And then, you really have to face yourself and as you sit completely naked in the bathroom.
So here's my thought on that, and I'm sure that at some point some designer will make this cute. Like with infant and toddler clothes, why can't we have snaps?
Oh, yeah.
At the bottom there. Crotch snaps.
Totally. It's so true. Yep. Well, I bet.
Also, you're freezing when you're in that bathroom and you have to take off the whole top part.
It's
right?
True. It's very undignified.
There you go. Okay. Sorry for that little tributary there.
Well, we're talking about fashion, so it's definitely it makes sense. So the background of fast fashion is pretty straightforward. Before the 1800s, fashion was slow. You had to source your own materials, and clothing was made of things like wool and leather. You had to, there were dressmakers, but it was expensive, and a lot of people were making their own clothes. The Industrial Revolution obviously introduced new technology like the sewing machine, so clothing became easier and quicker and cheaper to make. Many dressmaking shops started to use teams of garment workers or home morphers instead of, an individual person who had apprenticed for a long time and was an expert. This, as capitalism tends to do, led to disaster. I'm sure you're familiar with the first significant garment factory disaster when a fire broke out in New York's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911. That was the Shirtwaist Factory Fire, I believe it was called, and it claimed the lives of 146 garment workers, most of whom, shocker, were young female immigrants.
Yeah, that is a disastrous tale. And in New York, there are tours where you can learn more about that. But it is an ugly little piece of American history.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that sort of disregard for the lives of the people who the people who make so many of the things we consume, our food, the products that we, plastic goods, things that we buy, and clothing, it's still pretty rampant. So by the 60s and 70s, clothing trends were always a thing, but young people were starting to create new trends. And that was when clothing officially really became a form of personal expression. By but there was still a distinction between high fashion and things that were being purchased by more middle income people.
Well, so that's when I was growing up, and I can remember very vividly a lot of the fashion trends were coming out of London.
Uh-huh.
I remember like the white go-go boots and the striped dresses that were shorter, right? Mini dresses and mini skirts. That was all coming from London.
I wonder if that has to do with the more widespread use of television. You know,
quite possibly.
People were seeing the Beatles on Johnny Carson. It was like celebrities were always trendsetters, but it was so much more widely consumed.
I think so. I think so. And also, magazines, fashion magazines, which again had been around since probably the 20s, but even that much more popular in the 60s and 70s.
What do you remember about how you would get ideas for trends? Was it coming from magazines? Were you looking at what your friends were wearing?
Yeah, all of the above. 17 magazine was a big one until you were 17 and then you outgrew it.
Then you started reading Cosmo.
I started reading Ms., baby.
Oh, right, of course.
Which was not about fashion, I will add. And anyway, what happened was then we became hippies, and so fashion was army surplus. Like that's what I wore. Big Air Force jacket. We wore landlubbers, bell bottoms, unisex clothing. The T-shirts were the same. So that was a fashion as well.
Yeah.
Right? It was a fashion. I remember before going off to college, my mom wanted to buy me my college wardrobe, and I took her to the Army Navy surplus store in Central Square, Cambridge, and she was disgusted.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but that's where we went, and I got the same T-shirt in 5 colors.
But there was a higher fashion version of that, though, wasn't there?
Always. I mean, there were always people who were not hippies, right? Who were into fashion. And I think you're right. Television probably played a really big role. Television, magazines, all of that.
Well, so once we get into the 90s and 2000s, low-cost fashion reaches a peak. So online shopping becomes a possibility, and fast fashion retailers like H&M, Zara, The Gap, Old Navy becomes very popular. Old Navy had existed before the 90s, but it was an even cheaper version of The Gap. So they were kind of taking styles that were popular at The Gap and Banana Republic, which of course they're all owned by the same company, and mass producing them less expensively. So looks become reproduced quickly and cheaply, and now everyone is able to shop for on-trend clothing whenever they want from the comfort of their own home if they have an internet connection. So, it makes sense when we think about the way that we consume everything that this would happen. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's all in the interests of making more money.
Yes. Well, so we talked a little bit about the cost to the humans who and of course they're paid very little. Often child labor is used, and because there are different labor laws in many countries overseas, companies in the U.S. who would not use child labor perhaps on U.S. soil are able to use it overseas.
So where are we talking about? Where are our clothes made?
Many, many places. All over Asia. In Mexico, where I believe they have in some places stricter labor laws. And sometimes in Eastern Europe, but all when you see it's not necessarily a bad thing when clothing is produced overseas. It's not that you got to look for everything that's made in the US. And certainly there are problems with US manufacturing as well. But when something is very inexpensive and produced in, overseas, it's sometimes a flag that there's something untoward going on there.
Got it.
So we will pick up and talk more about this in just a minute after a word from our sponsor. So we are back and we're talking about the problems with fast fashion. And we were just chatting about some of the issues with the treatment of workers in some of these manufacturing plants. But one thing that we haven't talked about yet, we began to touch on it when we were talking about what happens to clothing that's donated. But there's a big issue in addition to the fact that so much of this clothing goes out of trend and then gets discarded, and then, as we established, doesn't necessarily continue its life as donated clothing. There's another big issue, which is that because so much of this clothing is made from cheap, low quality materials like polyester, which causes the clothing to degrade after just a few wears and then gets thrown away. There's also the issue of microfiber shedding. Are you familiar with this?
Nope.
Okay, so many synthetic fibers shed, and when you wash them in your washing machine, as you would do with any clothing to clean it, the microfibers shed and they pollute water systems.
You just can't win, can you?
I know. Unless you're making your own clothing from fabric that you weave yourself and
that's not going to happen.
No, I know. It's polluting our planet. The cheap textiles increase the fast fashion's impact. Conventional cotton requires enormous quantities of water and pesticides. And often is often produced in developing countries. And the results of drought risks create an extreme stress on the water basin. So if so much of their income is based on their exporting of fiber, when there's a drought, the water, instead of being used sparingly to provide for everyone, it just goes into maintaining the cotton crops, which is incredibly inequitable and unjust. The other thing
What about dyes? How toxic are dyes?
I didn't come across anything about dyes. Probably toxic. I mean, if it's following the trend on this, I need you to brace yourself for the next part because it's going to be upsetting, specifically to you. So
okay, all right, here we go. I'm ready.
All right, so content warning, everybody. Animal lovers content warning. So it's no surprise that fur, real fur is a terrible problem, but that's not really an issue when it comes to fast fashion because real fur is not often used in fast fashion because it's expensive. I was pretty horrified by this, but apparently there are some fast fashion brands that because producing fake fur, I guess, can be expensive. There are places that pass off cat and dog fur as faux fur to unknowing shoppers because it's cheaper than actually manufacturing faux fur.
There are no words is really what I want to say to that. Are they getting this off of dead animals? Like, where are they getting this?
Something tells me that it's not.
Don't tell me they're killing animals for their fur.
I think it's a little bit. I would guess it's probably more Cruella de Vil than the alternative. Pretty upsetting.
Well, actually, the truth is I'm a little bit I am an animal lover. It is true. Dogs in particular, cats, meh. But I really love children, and the idea of children being forced to work long hours making clothing for careless Americans bothers me a lot more.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's all inhumane, but I care I care a lot about the treatment of animals, but I care more about the treatment of people. Um,
Are there places that we shouldn't shop, that you just flat out shouldn't shop because they are the big offenders?
Yes, let me tell you. So we've got Zara and H&M.
Oh, there went those sponsorships.
I know. Sorry, guys. And we've also got Uniqlo. I never know how to pronounce that.
God,
Gap.
I love that place.
I know. I have some great stuff from there. And it always seems pretty well made, but apparently it's a big issue. A couple of brands from England, Primark and Topshop, which I've seen Topshop here, but I haven't seen Primark. Okay, but then we get into the really bad ones. So Shein, are you familiar with Shein? Shein.
Is it German? Maybe it's Shine.
Might be Shine. I don't know exactly where it's from, but so they're extra problematic. And H&M has been accused of this. Not only do they make very inexpensive stuff that they sell, they sell very cheaply, constantly updating their styles, therefore all the common problems of fast fashion, but they are known for stealing designs from artists. People, small artists post their work on Instagram or on their websites, and Shine or Shane, whatever it is, has been accused many, many, many times of lifting these designs, changing them slightly, and repurposing them.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me one bit.
So then we've also got Forever 21, which in the US is one of the worst players, and the Gap and Old Navy. Another thing to look out for is, I used to love outlet shopping, because the idea that they try to present is that these are even Nordstrom Rack used to be, oh, well, this is the stuff that didn't sell in the fancy department store. And sometimes that is the case. And, with sometimes it's just things they couldn't get off the shelf. But now, especially when it comes to the Gap, Old Navy, Banana Republic, J. Crew, a lot of the major mid to low market merchandisers have specially made cheaper mass-produced clothing made for their outlets.
That doesn't surprise me either.
And so when the tag says outlet in it, often it's just not as well made, and it's just going to end up in the landfill sooner. So it's something to look out for. But I want to talk about the things that we can do, because this is the kind of thing that makes you feel like, we're just completely helpless here. But there are I do have a list of things that are recommended by experts as what to do.
Great. And I know that this is getting more and more play out in the world. I mentioned to someone yesterday that we were going to be addressing this topic on All the F Words, and she said, oh, I know so many people that are really upset about it, and they could have been an expert, to come on your show. So I know that there is a growing demand, right, from consumers for, perhaps I should say, greener fashion. Is that such a thing?
Greener, more ethical, probably ethical.
Yeah, or just more environmentally sensitive.
Yeah, sustainable.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, definitely. And Gen Z, in many ways, has been part of the push for that, because it's so inspiring. Gen Z really has a sense of the world that we have presented them with and will leave them with. And they have been more vocal than, in a lot of ways, any other generation about the changes that need to happen, probably because in previous generations, we didn't quite realize what exactly we were doing. So that's very inspiring. there is one other thing to look out for is that there is a lot of greenwashing that happens where oftentimes some companies will have um, like an in-store kind of recycling scheme. They allow customers to drop off unwanted items in bins in the brand store. But again, as we discussed with when you donate clothing to charity, often very little of that clothing is actually used in the way that it's promised to. So it seems to me like the best and biggest way, there are two sides, two components of our clothing consumption and passing along to consider when we think about how to do better. So the first one is, and I'm going to kind of work backwards because often we get rid of the things we don't want before we replace them with something we do want. So being careful about the way that you pass on clothing. I used to think that donating clothing was the better choice than reselling it because I wanted to give my clothes away and have them be used or worn by somebody who was going to need them. But as we've established so often, that's not the case. So donating or not donating, but reselling work either on, as I mentioned before, eBay or Poshmark, or there's a company called ThreadUp. We'll link all of these in the show notes, which are, these are all places where you can purchase sort of clothing where there are expectations of how nice it needs to be in order to be sold, and buyers can really look carefully before they purchase it. That is a better way to ensure that the clothing is going to be used. Another thing I love is buy nothing groups. Are you familiar with this?
I don't know those people.
Okay. Especially if you are a parent of young kids, join your buy nothing group on Facebook immediately. For some reason, they all seem to operate on Facebook, but anyone who has had little kids knows that not only clothing, you go through so much stuff so fast. I am buying new shoes for my children every 3 months, it feels like. Toys, every day, outgrow stuff, and then you've got all this crap in your house. Buy nothing groups exist on the premise that consumerism and overconsumption is bad, and it is better to give things away. And it's sort of it relies on this idea that as long as you're giving and receiving kind of at a equal pace, then it all comes out in the wash. And the idea is to give away things for free and get things for free, and help your people. You see sometimes posts on Nextdoor. People
it makes so much sense. My daughter-in-law did this and continues to do this with her kids and all her friend group, where they have clothing in the different sizes, and when they're done with it, it's like, this is all 1-year-old clothing, and here it is in a bag, and they take out the things that are really damaged in one way or another, and continue to recycle through the friend group, so that sometimes things go and then they end up coming back for your second child, the same clothing that you bought for your first child, but a couple of other people wore it in between.
It's also so special to give your beloved clothes, that belong to your children, away to someone else. We have good friends in our neighborhood who have kids who are just a little bit younger than mine, and it's so wonderful. I love seeing. I remember when their daughter was born, when Sasha was maybe like 5 or 6 months old, and getting to see newborn clothes that were Anna's and then Sasha's, that it was so sad to stop using them on my kids, to get to kind of visit them and see them on someone else. I love it. So great. The other thing is, and this is something that I have tried to start doing, is to, when something is torn or wearing through or damaged in some other way, before I chuck it in my get rid of plastic bag or bin, I really try to consider whether I should just go get it repaired. And that used to be the standard, right? You got darn your socks, you sew things, and we kind of stopped doing that because we all are in this fast fashion mentality. So that's really important. But so there's the way we maintain or discard our clothing, but then there's also what we do when we're choosing new clothing, because that is often a part of life. So choosing sustainable brands, and often doing some research on the website of an item you're buying, or often I love buying clothes on Etsy from a maker, somebody who is making. I got this little shawl for my wedding from somebody who made custom clothing. And of course, sometimes that's financially prohibited. But when you can afford to buy nicer things, and, you do the math of how many times you're going to use something, which of course, I guess doesn't apply to my wedding shawl, but oftentimes thinking about the money you spend in a longer term sort of way, it actually is less expensive to buy something that's going to last longer. So it makes sense.
You have inspired me with all this talk about fast fashion to revive something that I used to do with my friends back when I lived in the other house, and that was switchin' bitch.
Ooh, that sounds good. What is switchin' bitch?
So switchin' bitch was you'd get together with friends who are similar sizes. In this case, we had the 2s, 4s, and 6s. And everyone had to go through their closet and make piles. And you had all the pants, all the shirts. And then, we expanded to include accessories. You'd have purses, belts, different things, shoes, of course. And then we'd gather in someone's home and have like sections of the room be for that kind of clothing. Order a pizza, make a salad, open a couple of bottles of wine. Send, if there were husbands involved, send them away to go be somewhere else or do something else.
You're going to be bitching about them. So.
We could bitch about them and everything else that was annoying in our lives, our children, our jobs, our parents, whatever. And we'd switch clothing. And so to this day, I periodically, from even back then, will see a skirt that I loved and was done with on someone else. And it's just a lovely evening. And then when you're done, everything that no one wanted gets donated to the landfill, I guess. I
love that. Well, there are, another option is there are third-party resellers, consignment, with nicer pieces that you can't seem to give away, but that are good enough that somebody might want them. Well, there are a couple of options. One is there are organizations like Dress for Success where they're looking for specific kinds of items, and those are much more likely to actually be used because they're looking for, if you have Dress for Success, if you don't know, is for women trying to get into, who need clothing for work and interviews. And so it's a specific kind of clothing. It's office wear for women. So there's always that option. But then there are people you can pay to photograph and upload your belongings onto places like Poshmark and eBay. So that is definitely an option. And I guess it's probably also worth looking into. Sometimes if you donate directly to a consignment shop, like a charity consignment shop, you sometimes have more luck than with the big ones like Salvation Army. But I think that is such a good idea. I want to do a switch and bitch as well. And I think that we should bring it back.
Thanks so much for listening to All the F Words today. She's Gabby Moskowitz and I'm Joanne Greene, and we'd love to hear from you. Send us your F words tell us what you do with your fast fashion, or if you've had some success at breaking the habit. We'd love to hear from that too. You can email us at allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at All the F Words Pod. And if you haven't yet, you should pre-order. Well, actually, I think by the time this episode comes out, Joanne's book will already be out in the world.
Well, or very soon thereafter.
Joanne's book, By Accident, is excellent. I have read it. It is wonderful. You should purchase it. I believe anywhere books are sold, you can pre-order or order it.
That's right. And I'm going to be doing a lot of author appearances. If you're interested to know about that, just go on to my website, which is Joanne-Greene, Greene.com, and sign up for the newsletter.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.